starting off, what are the parallels that you guys see between the two movements, the motivations, the justifications, and the narratives that are used to create these systems of oppression?
So I think if we kind of start off with colonization being this common enemy that we have across all groups, and so colonization being like the action or process of one group of people coming in and either displacing or taking control of the indigenous population that's there. So if we start with this foundation, and I'm sure many of you already have these lights going off in your head of how that ties to not only Palestine, but what we've seen in Africa, what we've seen in the United States, and in many other places across the world, these themes of power, control, and conquer and divide. But if you aren't coming from this kind of decolonial lens, you can get caught up in these narratives that have been presented. Starting way back to the creation of Israel, you've had narratives floating around of the establishment of Israel being a tool of like Western atonement for their role in the Jewish Holocaust, and also kind of a little underlying of racism, of them not wanting to have Jewish people coming to their own country, so we have a country that's made just for them, we can put them there, and we don't have to worry about it. We also see kind of this lens of spiritual justification, the use of Zionism with Judaism, two that are completely separate, and we hear this time and time again, they're not connected. But the use of Judaism as a spiritual justification of that this land was given to a group of people over another. And we also see those ties with Christianity as well. Evangelical Christians seeing Israel as a land that Messiah is going to return, and so the Jewish population must return there in order for this Messiah to come about. And before I ramble on too much, we can see this in the United States as well, the weaponization of religion and Christianity used against the black population, indigenous populations over here.
To add on to that beautiful breakdown, incarceration and the prison industrial complex and the military industrial complex, which all of that falls under colonialism. But it's been the access, it's been a lot of folks' entry point into the movement, into our fight back against the state. And so my earliest involvement with the movement was with Trayvon Martin in 2012. And then we started making this connection of policing, which I didn't think to make that connection, right? Because it wasn't an officer that killed him. But then we saw the criminal justice system justify it. And we were like, what the hell? How can you justify it? And then Cleveland, Michael Brown, then in August of 2014, then Cleveland, Tamir Rice, a little boy. And we were like, we know the system's going to say this is wrong. This is wrong. But no, they justified it. And how did they justify it? It was something I always knew, but I didn't think they would act upon it, right? And they acted upon but the racism that's inherent in this country, which is he had a gun, he was black, he looked like a monster. He looked too old, and therefore using those words and that coded language to justify the killing of us. And then we connected that to incarceration, which to think in 2010 what Michelle Alexander was doing with the new Jim Crow was going to play into the larger resistance against white supremacy. To finally see, we've been incarcerating black folks because they look like they're dangerous. They're doing the most drugs. They're the most criminalized neighborhoods. So therefore, incarcerate. And then, when Michael Brown was going down, who was in solidarity with us in the Black Lives Matter movement? Folks in Palestine. I was like, what are they? We were getting tweets. We were getting messages. Use milk to take the tear gas out of your face. I was like, okay. This now my lens started to really grow, and realizing that we've been incarceration has been the fundamental tool to colonize black and brown folks, to really suppress us, and generation after generation, And sure enough, my earliest experience with incarceration was at the age of 7 years old, when I was in a jail cell. Because when the police had came in, my mom working, a single mom, my father had just passed, raising 7 children. Police came and took us out of the home because the youngest, who at the time was 5, couldn't be at home by herself. But we already had our system set up. She was good. But therefore, police came in, used language, unfit mother, took us out of the home, and to discipline young kids who are already in a type of foster care type environment, you use incarceration to traumatize and control children. At the age of 7, I'm already in a jail cell. Got the trauma and everything. I mean, just overwhelming trauma for a 7-year-old. And I was only able to fully process it in my late 20s of what that means. And so one of the profound parallels is that we're experiencing incarceration at young ages and processing that and what that means. So I just want to put that out there.
That kind of reminds me of a quote I wrote down actually from the Students for Justice in Palestine and the Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights. They released a statement many years ago that said, as people who are fighting for justice in Palestine, we understand how racism is used to justify and perpetuate an unjust system that oppresses whole populations. Our government tries to divide us by telling us that black is synonymous with criminal in the same way that it tries to tell us that Arab and Muslim is synonymous with terrorist.
Right.
So I think that kind of really speaks to the political prisoners that we have overseas in Palestine and the Palestinian youth who are also incarcerated at very young ages with no due process, no set of criminal acts against them, but that criminalization is used against black and brown Palestinian populations as a means of control. And kind of this overarching theme, if we tie it back to colonization, this method of control and divide, the establishment of Israel over in the Middle East was a method for European imperialism and Western interests in pushing those interests over there, the same that they did with Africa, the resources that they wanted to capture over there, and it was much easier for them to have a place over in the Middle East to operate out of in order to further their own U.S. interests, or Western imperialist interests.
So with these modern examples of kind of systems of oppression, so militarization and incarceration, are there any other modern examples that you see that both affect the black community here in the U.S. and in Palestine?
Going back to kind of the point of criminalizing everything, I wrote like a couple points down as I was like thinking about talking about this. The criminalization of harvesting za'atar over in Palestine. In the 1970s, Israel claimed that za'atar was going extinct, or I can't remember what the term is for, where they were no longer able to harvest it, and za'atar for Palestinians is such a connection. We have such a connection to food, and so having this criminalization of our land and being able to use our land ties back into, I think, with black Americans and removing them from their culture. We are oftentimes in Palestine not allowed to wave our own flags, not allowed to express support for Palestinian solidarity. And so going back to this over-militarization kind of idea, we over-militarize in our country here the actions of people protesting here, people who are in poverty, people who are on the streets, and they get locked up for living out on the streets. And so I think having these power control presences really give us this common idea of that we are not free. Even though we are living here in the United States where we are under this illusion of being able to vote for people that we want to vote about or free to go about and live our lives, we are truly in a surveillance state of police control.
And to add with that, the intentional miseducation. Like, we're not intentionally being educated about Palestinians, let alone black folks. Critical race theory is still something that's being fought against, which really shocks me because there's so much even I don't know about the transatlantic slave trade that I thought I knew until I saw the 1619 documentary. And how shocked I was to hear black folks' early involvement. I don't know why I was shocked. Anyway, it was shocking to hear about some of our earliest involvement with resisting slave masters, and also being a part of a project of legalizing black folks in this country early on in the 1600s. So the intentional not teaching around white supremacy's play, not just in the U.S., but globally. Globally. I mean, globally. Is how we are divided, right? You hear, black folks, just in Cleveland alone, you just hear this. You say, well, Palestinians are not for us. First of all, I didn't know we had that many Palestinians in Cleveland until I was starting to build community with folks. And then the other miseducation part about that is by intentionally miseducating us, we become enemies. False ones at that. False ones. When we are very powerful allies. Powerful. When we came together for that resolution, it was powerful. Right? Because the system already knows how to use black and brown faces, right? We call them the color guard, right? You put a black person as the president of the city council. You use a black person like Obama as the president of the United States as a black face to justify what happened in Iran and in Afghanistan. Like to justify the murdering people who look like us, right? But if you educate us, say, no, we shouldn't have Obama be okay with surveillance and droning, because that is indicative of how they started the transatlantic slave trade, sending white folks into these African places and just using other black people to capture black people, et cetera, et cetera. The intentional miseducation, which I have to do all the time with our Freedom School. Tiffany Harrison's here. Helps us out in our Freedom School last year, teaching a generation what it meant for justice. Do they want to hear it? No. It doesn't resonate, or it doesn't echo along with the larger meta-narratives they're hearing in school, or who knows, on Instagram or what have you. But miseducation is a very powerful tool that's being used.
And I think that kind of ties into with these pushing of racist narratives and these internal biases that we have, and being able to divide us as people. It kind of makes me think about in Palestine, the settlers who are living on the land. We kind of tend to divide people from their governments without realizing that the settlers who are living on Palestinian land it's violent by nature. You're living on someone else's land, and they play an active role in hurting Palestinians and in taking over land. We're seeing it right now as they're burning down buildings and villages on their own accord with the cover of the IDF. I had a relative of mine, a cousin of one of my cousins, who was on his farm harvesting olives, taking care of the land, and was killed by a gang of settlers who took it upon themselves to just come and murder him, and they do it with no recourse afterwards. They are encouraged by the IDF to take it upon themselves that this is their land and we're taking it back. So I think we can, as you were saying, see those parallels here is through this misinformation, they're able to divide us when we are much stronger together, and that's what they fear is what we can do when we are knowledgeable and we come together.
I think education is a huge part of, questioning the structure and being able to resist. What are some other forms of resistance that you think can kind of break us away from this Western imperialism and break us away from this ideological capitalism that we're experiencing that can help move these movements forward and together?
I would say things like this definitely are a good place to start. Having these moments of conversations and of teach-ins. There's so much that I feel like I'm still learning every day, and having lived experiences as a Palestinian, or learning from my family, arming ourselves with knowledge to combat the propaganda that's coming at us is so important, because the Zionists have such a strong playbook, and the United States has such a strong playbook of this. We are protecting democracy. We are Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. We know better. The U.S. comes from a sense of moral superiority, that we have to go in and take over these lands. We have to go in and help these people because they push these narratives of they know better. smart or not as intelligent or not as capable to build up their own societies without drawing back to the parallel of that they've made it this way, that the United States has gone into other countries around the world and completely destroyed them. And how can you expect a place like Palestine, and specifically Gaza, who's been decimated, where it's unlivable, to be able to grow as a society when they can't even have homes to live in? So it's pushing people down, as they've done to Black Americans, and I can speak more to this experience here in the United States, pushing people down. We need to build each other up as a community, and I think having moments like these or connections like these, still being together and having these conversations is definitely a huge way we can combat that.
Yes, sir. We're doing another extension here. This workshop has until 15 after.
Okay.
To wrap up.
Okay.
And then the final plenary will start in the new courtroom at 2:30.
2:30. All right. To add what's added I think one of the clearings I've had in regards to resistance, one of the moments that made the most sense was always being in the movement. It's not a choice, it has to be a lifestyle. Because it's in the movement is when you get to experience what I think was called transformative justice. This system has done a good job of making sure we are blind and insensitive to what's going on around us. Just mind you, 30-some thousand, probably upwards of that now, have died in Palestine, effortlessly, right? And if you talk to your neighbor or whatever, you know, I feel this type of way about it, blah, blah, blah. That's intentional by a system that has made sure that people are blind and insensitive to it. That's why they killed Dr. King, because Dr. King's voice was becoming more and more widespread, but not just his voice, the movement was. People were connecting with poverty and how poverty was intentional. And the I Am a Man movement would come up, and the Poor People's Campaign would galvanize thousands of folks, black, white, you name it, coming together to stop poverty. Oh, the system said, no, we can't have that. We can't have a theology of liberation becoming a main narrative for the country. And they killed that. But when I joined the movement, I felt like I was baptized into what our ancestors started and wanted us to be involved in. So one of the ways we resist now is joining the movement, being there on Tuesdays at county council meetings as we stand together and with your voice, with your heart, and with your soul, voice your opinion. That's what the system is afraid of. We stopped a $3.5 billion jail in Los Angeles. I would never forget that, because I had my own doubts that we could do it. I did. I was like, this is a multi-billion-dollar county, a county that has more money than some countries, and we're going to tell this county what to do. And sure enough, we did. Wow. With the power of the people, right? And that baptism really showed me that we can become a new creature. We can become a new world when people stand up, like we did with the city of Cleveland. They said, no, we're not going to pass a resolution. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. But how many weeks? 17 weeks? We were baptizing them, right? With the power of the people. So I think that's really important.
And I think it's also kind of, that just makes me think of this kind of like long-term struggle that we have, or this like long-term community building that we're doing. I think a lot of people, especially in our society, we look for like immediate gratification or immediate results. And as we saw 17 weeks at City Council, we had a statement from Wayne coming out that he's not going to pass a resolution, and we still went back, and we still went for it, and we got it. And now that we're starting this kind of new venture with Cuyahoga County and divestments, we know that it's not going to be a one and done, that it's going to be a process. And so putting yourself in the mindset of like, that this is, going to be a long-term community building, that you want to invest kind of a lifestyle in it more than just what actions are you taking every day because it can be overwhelming, but it's part of the community building as well. There's something that I was going to say, I think it just went out of my head.
Yeah,
It'll come back to me.
we're joining the jail coalition at these county meetings, so it's pretty serendipitous. They've been going out trying to, get advocate for a smaller jail, and at the same time we're advocating for a divestment from Israel. So we don't want our money going to building jails in Palestine. So it really is all so interconnected, and I think that by keeping our struggles separate and allowing the fabrics of society to keep us apart, it makes us easier to oppress.
Yes.
So how do you guys see the future of the movement? How do you see building solidarity between communities, and how do we keep that momentum going?
Yeah, I think it's like starting to make these connections. I think specifically for us, like here in the United States, a lot of people are just comfortable and they're mundane, that they don't look, to your point, to what's going on in the outside world or even in their own situations, that there can be a better world. And I think it's starting to have more of these conversations of what that world could look like. Because it can be better. We don't have to be living this way where we're working 9-to-5 jobs and can barely afford to pay rent or pay our bills, where we're separated from our communities, where we don't get support in like raising our families or in getting our educations. So I think starting to have more of these conversations and starting to piece together kind of these narratives that we've originally been shown of, well, this is the way that society is and this is the way we have to live. Imagining a better world and starting to create that in our own little circles is going to affect change. I think for anyone who was in here before and had listened to Shireen speak, she talks a lot about having her own garden at her house and being able to connect back to her own culture and feeding other people and starting to develop these ideas of how can we care for one another when we have a state and a society that abandons us. And so that really makes me think about like my own position and like identifying my own culture and how I want to present that to myself and how I want to share that with others. As to my point, we all are connected. We all have these kind of like common themes of white supremacy, of capitalism being tools to control the population. And if we start to look beyond those that have been put into place, we can create our own.
Yeah. I love the question you asked. What's the last part of your question?
Like how do we keep the momentum going? Is it
Towards was it a new word?
you can say that.
I'm sorry.
Say that.
Because I think in that question, which I didn't think about it, before I joined the movement, justice for me was always a topic we talked about. Until I joined the movement and saw that you could actually make change. And so, adopting a framework of transformative justice. I wish somebody would have told me that when I first joined the movement. And what do I mean by that? Is that the world you want to see will begin with your own transformation and your own healing. Healing justice is a part of transformative justice. That we're living with the traumas of our past, and this world is going to traumatize us. But healing is possible, right? Where you are going to therapy and you're building out wellness as a societal thing and not just an individual thing. Realizing that we do need, in some ways, go back to the old time way of how our ancestors went to the waters or went to the rivers and found some type of spiritual renewal there, right? Not just as an individual practice, but as a societal practice. And so I think what I'm trying to get to drive my nail home is probably the reason why I feel so led to be a preacher and a pastor and lead God's people, is that a transformed person can lead towards a transformed society. If you can believe in the power of who you are and your voice, and you join that in a larger concert of a movement with other voices, wow, right? You saw that with the civil rights movement. You saw that where people literally said, I'm okay with walking from my home to work or to school because that bus is a part of a tool against me. A lot of these folks were connected to God through their churches, through their spiritualities, and knew God was going to take them to the other side of this moment. Of course, God eventually would do so. And so, transformative justice, understanding what that means, realizing that the person next to you is more than just a sibling. They are on this planet with you in some type of spiritual realm. Willing to be transformed in your work. And that right there will carry you throughout your entire movement. That even for the few minutes I've been in with this solidarity moment with our Palestinians, I feel already we're going to be growing together for the rest of our lives in some way, shape, form, or fashion because of what this work has called us to. And I hope I can articulate that better as I go down the road.
I think that also just kind of speaks to the conversations we have, like kind of changing the way we talk about things. We often talk about stuff through the lens that the United States or the Western imperial world talks about, who they label as terrorists or terrorist groups, and starting to be, and I know I'm doing this a lot more myself, supportive of our resistance movements, of the movements of liberation. We get criminalized, labels as terrorists for fighting back, and that's by design for people to not want to associate themselves with a group that's demonized. When in reality, it's oppressed groups that are fighting against oppressive groups. And so changing our language in our conversations or in our posting and being more outwardly supportive of these liberation movements, I think is going to be another energizing push for us to be able to come together as a collective and be more in solidarity with one another, because we have these, as Maya had said, like separate liberation movements going on. We're all fighting these same common enemies, and so being loudly and openly supportive of these like resistance and liberation movements, I think, is super important as we continue our conversations individually and then collectively as a whole.
I think I like a lot what you said about transform people and how that can create transformed societies. I think that the one thing that keeps me going in the struggle is being able to dream about what our goals are. Being able to dream of, let's not build a smaller jail, let's have no jail.
That's right.
Things like that, and I think that keeps me going. What are your guys' kind of like dreams for the movement?
That's a good
That's a
way. It
very-
causes me to dream.
Yeah.
Or if anyone else at this point has, wants to weigh in or has any questions, we can kind of open it up and talk about what everyone else's dreams are and where everyone else sees the movement going or where they see themselves in the movement.
I had a question, if that's okay. I think that one of the ways hearing you all talk about the divide and conquer strategy is so apparent that has been an age-old custom in the United States, right? Well, when immigrant groups have come here, when my Irish ancestors came here, it was hey, we're gonna put you down a little bit, but it won't be as bad as those other people over there, right? And so anti-blackness was the cost of joining the club. That if you want access to white privilege, if you want access to any kind of come up in class in money, the price you pay is you have to inflict anti-black violence. And so my question is, have you seen that kind of strategy be used? Obviously it's not the same in a post-Patriot Act world that Arab Americans are never going to be fully accepted as white, but have you seen that kind of strategy play out, and what do you think is the best antidote to that bribe?
You're probably not gonna like my response, but it's necessary. Your ancestors didn't come here and learn anti-blackness. Anti-blackness, white supremacy was already global. It was already, apartheid was in South Africa, not because America invented racism. The Dutch were really good about practicing this Calvinism where it put white people on top. And so the church was able to use the church or Jesus to attach whiteness to it. And that was one of the ways, I've studied religion. So I just know that's one of the ways, not the only way, that whiteness was become a what you call it, the top, or the supreme, right? And then that's why we saw when South Africa went on the Palestinian side to the International Court, which is in Holland? The Hague. Where is that? What country is that?
Netherlands.
Netherlands, right? And they were denied their suit of genocide. But this same court was clear that what Germany was doing was genocide. And so it's really important to already come with this assertion that white supremacy was global, and you have to research it and learn about that. But I think to the second part of your question, so what are the strategies of undoing something?
To kind of like the antidote to that bribe that's offered to
To the bribe when you come to the U.S.
Yeah, so like Palestinians come to the U.S. Maybe you can come up a little bit and make some more money if you buy into this.
Oh yeah, buying into America. Well, you gotta come in here. This is already a lie. You're coming in on stolen land. I was told that Johnny Appleseed did so much for this land. Putting apple trees. Folks have been here for thousands of years, cultivating this land in powerful ways. And obviously, I just learned it when I was in my 20s. So, be willing to call it a lie, and tell it the truth. That's a whole other thing.
I think a huge part to your question too is, you're talking about people who are trying to get up. Any progressive movement is doomed if we don't understand the role that capitalism plays, and it's about first dismantling capitalism altogether, so that it doesn't matter who's on top, as a way to kind of beat the system down and again focus on the systems of oppression and not our individual oppression. Do you want to help? Go ahead.
And I think for me, that directly ties into like the dream that I have both for like both separate movements, but also the sort of unified Black Palestinian space as well, is that like we are intentional about undoing the ways that we outcast our own.
Mm-hmm.
So like we know in like a lot of Black communities, homophobia is like rampant. In most communities, like disability, like injustice and all of those things are really, really rampant. And so when we are thinking about how we're building out our liberation movement, being intentional about bringing those folks in and centering them in the conversation. I come from like a reproductive justice background, and RJ says like specifically that all of our things are intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
So like I cannot have reproductive freedom if I don't have carceral freedom, if I don't have environmental freedom, if I don't have food and all of these other things. But we have to do the same thing, not just with the resources that we need, but also with the people who are in our communities. So like if we know, I don't know what it looks like as far as like homophobia, for example, if that's something that is very prevalent in Palestinian communities, when we are building our coalitions, when we are building unified spaces, making sure that we are like laying those things out on the table, like, hey, this is an issue, this is a gap that our community has, and when we are deepening our movements, we need to deepen with those people in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tool used by the Israeli government to kind of, and of course it's not true, but to say that, Israel is the only place in the Middle East where, people can get married. Same-sex marriage is legal in only Israel. So, if we focus on amplifying those voices in the movement, we can also dismantle some of the lies that they've created.
I think that speaks a lot to like the internalizing work community as well. Something you mentioned like before, holding on to our own sense of like morals and things that we believe in. There's someone now who, after 40,000 plus Palestinians have been murdered and are not at least questioning what's going on. I question your morals, and it's something that I think about all the time. And what I'm doing every day is like, what actions am I taking to be a vehicle of change, and what actions am I doing that can be harmful
mean, even thinking about dreaming, at the heart of most of these social movements, LGBTQ folks are there.